if we have taken the time to learn from them, of this beautiful example of gender equal matrilineal societies that place an incredible value on the differentiated yet equally important roles of men and women, in tradition keeping, in society keeping, and in the provisions of a beautiful and sustainable society. We are thrilled to have all of you join us today for the second installment of our 10-part series under the Men Like Me program. This initiative, funded by the Department of Women and Gender Equality Canada, is designed to equip men with the tools and knowledge to act as allies in preventing gender-based violence. We want to thank our 7 program delivery partners who are located in Calgary, Edmonton, Yellowknife, Saskatoon, Regina, and Toronto for standing with us as we combat what we really believe is an epidemic of gender-based violence across the country. As we dive into this webinar today, we're focused on breaking the stigma preventing men and boys in Canada from seeking help, from having conversations about the issues that deeply affect them, be those physical or mental health issues. Men are far often less likely than women to reach out for support, particularly when constrained by deeply ingrained and damaging gender norms, systemic barriers, and cultural expectations that equate vulnerability with weakness. These social pressures stigmatize asking for help and make it more difficult to access necessary resources. Yet, seeking support is crucial for all of us to be our healthiest, most effective selves, and is crucial for the mental, emotional, and physical well-being that foster healthier individuals, healthier families, and healthier communities. I will just add that for me, it's a real honor for Mothers Matter Canada to be in this work in partnership with White Ribbon for this program. The patriarchy and the toxic social norms that exist in our society that create gender inequality affect men and women. They do so in different ways, but one of the most insidious ways that they affect that patriarchy affects gender inequality is by isolating men from themselves, from their own identity, isolating them from each other. And it is really easy for us to view gender-based violence as a men versus women issue when it is in fact not. It is in fact the symptom of social sickness, if you will, that hurts all of us in different ways, but in equally damaging and equally ways that are equal to needing help, support, and it's something that we're only going to be able to address when we have all genders, whether it's on the binary or even further, working together. So to carry on that conversation today, we have Amy Zhu, who is also from Mothers Matter Canada, who will be joining us as our moderator. That's right, you get all the Amy's today from MMC. So Amy, please, thank you for asking me to open this event today, and I'm happy to turn it over to you for our conversation. Really looking forward to listening in.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everyone. I'm the other Amy, Amy Zhou. I'm the project coordinator at Mothers Matter Canada, who is also currently managing the Men Like Me program. And I'm joined today by 3 brilliant speakers who bring a wealth of experience in engaging men and boys in gender-based violence prevention, and also just helping them break barriers in mental health stigma. So they're there also to promote healthy mindsets. So please join me in welcoming Baldev Mutta, Brianna Miller, and Taylor Dimitrioff, who will share their insights on how we can better engage men and boys in their journey towards healing. Let's hear a brief introduction from each speaker. Baldev?
Yes, thank you, Amy. Thank you for inviting me to this very important forum. My journey into social work started back in the 1980s. And that's when I took upon myself to start working with men, and especially with men who were charged with domestic violence against their partners. And in Punjabi communities, mostly wives that they were charged with violence against their wives. So I had the opportunity to work for 35 years with these men approximately about 100 men in a year that our program kind of worked. So over a course of 35 years, these are a lot of men that I had kind of opportunity to work with. And three things I just wanted to share with you very quickly in the introduction. One is that the majority of these men didn't had any kind of skills to be able to process their emotions. The only emotion that they were able to display was anger. That was the dominant theme in 35 years that came across. So once we started to deconstruct their anger and we talked about frustration, we talked about how they felt when somebody said no, even accepting no from their partner, all those issues became very clear that there are certain men who had communications and feelings around and social skills oriented deficits. So these were men that were very easy to treat. These were men that actually wanted to learn and resented that they were hurting their partners and their children. The second category of the men had additional problems around drinking, expressing their emotions, and they were addicted to some kind of substance, including pornography. And so they couldn't understand how substance abuse, pornography, gambling, and their power and control actually harmed their partners, and that they wanted their partners to become accustomed and give them permission to do this because in their mind, this is what all men do. And so when we challenged that in a group setting, they also kind of understood, oh my God, we all our life we believed in a certain kind of thing, and that we shouldn't kind of do it. And the final, there were very few kind of men who were either narcissist or who were borderlining on some kind of either sociopathic tendencies or psychopathic tendencies. So those were very few men, and then we just kind of referred them back to for some psychiatric evaluation, and that's them. So the lessons that we have learned is that if men and young boys are taught to deal with their emotions, are able to express themselves better, understand what controlling the whole dynamics between care and control, how we can process, I think we will be able to create a better Canada for all our communities here. So that's my brief introduction, Amy.
Thank you for sharing, Baldev. Brianna?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Brianna Miller. My pronouns are she and her, and I am speaking to you from Mi'kma'ki here in Nova Scotia. And a little about me. I come as a woman here talking a little bit about engaging men and boys. I have extensive background in facilitation, program design, youth work, system change, and social justice. I'm also a survivor of gender-based violence, and so there has been previous work that has influenced and impacted my journey into this work. But for right now, I have been working for 9 years at the YMCA Immigrant Services. And so we're an organization that supports newcomers and immigrants as they arrive here in Nova Scotia with their settlement. And in particular, I'm coordinating our gender-based violence prevention program, which builds capacity of service providers here in Nova Scotia to better understand gender-based violence, the unique challenges and barriers that impact newcomers around this topic, how to work on prevention and intervention, as well as actually doing the work. So I work with an incredible team doing prevention work with newcomers, immigrants, and refugees. I also want to just highlight that we're also a partner and leading a national gender-based violence strategy for agencies serving immigrants. So I also bring the beautiful wisdom and expertise from the partnership that I'm part of, which is the anti-violence and the settlement sector. So just briefly, one of the things that's really exciting about the work that we're doing here in Nova Scotia around gender-based violence prevention and working with newcomers is we do work with all genders because we do believe that that's an important part of this work. However, we do have a very large emphasis on engaging men and boys, and I think Amy alluded why that's such an important thing. I couldn't do this work without my incredible team, and in particular, we have two amazing men who are also supporting kind of this work and leading this work in our program, Manaf Mansour and Yuang Maduk. We believe strongly that engaging men and boys and gender-based violence to see themselves as part of the solution is essential. And that begins by engaging men and creating spaces to have conversations, to model that positivity, and to create spaces where men can be brave and vulnerable and dive deeper into root causes. So we have men and boys programs, ongoing adult men's groups, African men's specific groups, leadership groups for that 16 to 25-year-old age range to take action in their communities, as well as just place-based guys groups. And so one of the things that I will mention about our programs is that we will talk about violence against women, about kind of gender inequity, homophobia, things like that. But we also take into the consideration of those root causes, like settling in a new country, the challenges and fears of kind of parenting in a new country, healthy relationships, the impacts of trauma, racism, mental health stigma, and accessing supports. So that's some of the things that I'm going to be bringing in today. And I just want to express that I come not with just myself, but I work with an incredible group of staff.
Thank you, Brianna. Taylor, would you like to share?
Yeah, ani sibili kita indigenous cause gig no wolf with them. Yeah, I'm coming to you from Manitoba, Winnipeg. It's kind of my roots, my home spot, which is awesome. Um, and yeah, but my name is also Taylor Dimitrov. Pronouns are he, they, il, elle en français, for Jesse français aussi. Sorry for the people that are doing translation through like AI. I'm sure that was difficult. Just acknowledging my pronouns in French too. But yeah, a little bit about me is yes, I also work with White Ribbon. So I've been with White Ribbon for the past almost 3 years now, and yeah, very excited to sit on this yeah lovely crew of super knowledgeable individuals. So very very excited about that. My background's in mental health. I was probably in mental health for about 12 years, always working with youth, but always in like an education way. And so, yeah, always here to kind of like guide and do what I can, which is very exciting. And then, yeah, but then I started talking a lot more about in my mental health journey around how men aren't feel like they can't talk about like their own emotions and how that ties to masculinity as well too. So yeah, moving to White Ribbon was a natural transition, and so yeah, very much excited to talk about the different roles and perspectives and how we can kind of engage men and bring them in because the whole thing with White Ribbon and really everything that I do is it's bringing people into the conversation. It's never a shamed based approach, and it's just we're all here to learn and you can do things in a different way. And I just want to meet people where they're at. So yeah, thanks for the invite. Very excited to keep chatting. But yeah, Amy, I'll turn back to you.
Thank you, Taylor. So for our webinar series, we always start off asking speakers, what does healthy masculinity mean to you? So we're going to start off with Baldev.
So, for example, a couple of things. Healthy masculinity means that we should be able to express all types of emotions, but predominantly when we look at the general discourse in the community, boys' masculinity means that they have to be macho, that they have to have big muscles, that they have to be tough and don't show their emotions. If they are hurt, they cannot cry. And all those kind of issues are not healthy. Healthy masculinity means that you should be showing that you are caring and that you're compassionate and that you're kind towards all the other humanity, including to animals as well. There is a lot of research that shows that if men are abusive towards their partners, that they are also abusive towards other animals as well. So that's another one of the screening tools. So for me, I think it's important to look at in our society, have we created an opportunity for men to become vulnerable? When do our culture appreciate that a man is actually crying at watching a movie where an emotional scene is being depicted, or at the time of when somebody is passing away, do men cry? Do they show their emotions that they are actually grieving and they're feeling the loss, or are they going to be kind of showing their tough side? Oh yes, somebody has died and then I don't need to cry. And I think that if we are able to, within our respective communities that we work and live in, if we demonstrate an ability for men to be vulnerable and being expressive and being able to demonstrate, I think to that extent we have demonstrated healthy masculinity. And I don't need to go into all the other aspects of masculinity, because we are all aware of what are the negative consequences of toxic masculinity or hyper masculinity, right? So for me, teaching boys at a very young age that it's okay to cry when they fall down, and that it's okay for them to take care of guests. It's not the woman's job to make tea or coffee when guests arrive. Men can also do it. Men can also set up the table, that men can also remove the dishes from the table. And I think those small things within a family goes a long way to demonstrate that men are equally caring. And it's not just a woman's domain to be the nurturer. Men can also be nurturer, that they can also take care of the babies, that they can hold them. It's not their job to just play with them for a few minutes, and the moment the baby starts crying, we just hand it back to the mom. Here, now you take care of it, because that's my patience has run out. I think those are for me some important things. And just a final part that I just want to share. One of the challenges we are facing in our community within the Sikh Punjabi community is that our past has always been very militant. So we are a militant, we are depicted as warriors. We have the largest number of people in the Indian Army. We have a very militant background. But this militant background and this macho image and being brave also comes as a cost in Canada, because we tend to not demonstrate any kind of compassion within our family. So we work hard, we work very, very hard, but that comes as a cost for our mental illness and our physical health. So the cultural part, that yes, we should preserve our culture, but then we also need to look at, do we need to be militant in Canada, or can we not accept the new reality that we can become depressed, that we can become tired, that we should be able to talk to our wives and not say, well, no, you take care of the children and we will just go and earn and give you the money, life will be fine. So I think those are some challenges we are being confronted within our own community. How do you preserve something from the past and make some sense within Canada? And how do we create a emotional side of our men who are working so hard, but need them to understand, hey, your hard work comes at a cost. So those were some of the brief comments I wanted to make, Amy.
Thank you, Baldav. Yes, I definitely find that vulnerability is something that's so challenging, that all men can struggle with and all humans can struggle with, but it is so critical to be vulnerable and just to reach out for support when needed. And it's also challenging, as you mentioned, to preserve the elements of your cultural perceptions of masculinity and how we can tie it into what's healthy and what will be great for your mental health in the long run. So thank you. Brianna, would you like to share?
Yeah, thank you. And I just feel like a lot was already said, so I'll try to keep it really short. I really appreciate what was previously mentioned around particularly emotions. But for in our program, healthy masculinity is a masculinity that's free of the constraints of patriarchy or having to fit inside of a box of what it means to be a man and whatever that looks like in whatever culture. Oftentimes, and not always, but often, this isn't as sensitive to allowing men to explore different versions of what masculinity means to them, or if they don't fit into that box. It's often not LGBTQ inclusive, and as we've already mentioned and heard, it can often be really harmful also to men and how they navigate mental health and their emotions, but also the impact on other genders and the relation to other genders as well. So I think healthy masculinity is working with men to allow them to redefine masculinity without that kind of patriarchal kind of version. But something I would think about too that's really important is to make sure that we're having this kind of intersectional approach to what is masculinity and just recognizing that what it is to be a man, for example, can look very different across cultures. And so when we're talking about kind of healthy versus like unhealthy or toxic masculinity, sometimes we have these assumptions of what those are. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that it may look different in different cultures and different avenues. And so some cultures and communities actually are very supportive around emotions, and some do have different gender roles. So I think the idea for me around healthy masculinity is like the not having the constraints to fit into something, having choice, helping to alleviate the expectations and support men in understanding and navigating those expectations, as well as not being, if they can't meet them, if they don't fit into that, if other men don't, how can we support them? But it's also about navigating things that often men are not taught about, like navigating rejection, navigating grief or justice or conflict. There's a lot of things around processing emotions that men are often taught to do in isolation. And often having to be strong for the family. Again, we work predominantly with a lot of immigrants and refugees, and the settlement journey can be really challenging, but we often see the men having to be extra strong to like hold it together for their families. But meanwhile, there is a lot of trauma, there is a lot of processing, there is a lot of challenges. I would also say healthy masculinity is also like exploring men's role in gender inequity. So having some sort of lens around anti-oppression, around power and privilege, understanding things that impact them, but also their role in kind of that and exploring kind of anti-oppression in men's work. And the last thing I'll mention is that to be really sensitive in the fact that healthy or positive masculinity is not rejecting traditional norms in a sense. It can be, but to help men realize that there's ways that we can look at strength-based approaches that celebrate cultural aspects or root things, whether it's culture or religion, that are positive, and then explore the things that maybe we want to leave behind or challenge and things like that. And the idea is around making sure that people are safe and have rights and are consenting to kind of the things. So as you were saying, some people really want to challenge those gender roles and family dynamics, and other people really feel empowered with their gender role. But it's about the consent. It's about kind of, is everyone involved in that family okay with that? Can we share those things? Can we make sure we're valuing all of those kind of things? If people do want to kind of share those aspects. But yeah, I think just some mindfulness around kind of masculinity looks very different, and I think that we can explore it together.
Thank you, Brianna. I really like how you mentioned that it's really helping men navigate through their emotions because it is okay for them to feel all sorts of emotions, and it's also challenging for them to disclose what emotions they're feeling. So really navigating and also allowing them to recognize sometimes the privilege that they might be in, or maybe the vulnerability that they're in. So all different perspectives that they might be in, and just working to find all forms of masculinity together. Taylor, did you want to respond?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, for sure. I think I mean like I typically say that like masculinity isn't wrong or bad, right? It's just I love the word was shared because that's what I was gonna go with, but it's redefining it, right? It's redefining what strong and strength and macho means, right? And so for me, it's really like I'm a single father, and so exactly like Bella was sharing is that I don't have the opportunity to, if my kiddo's upset, to just pass her to someone. It's me that I have to do that. I have to make sure that she's safe and she's good. And then with that though, um, it's what I need to do then is really is like filling my own cup and making sure that I'm taking care of myself too. And so in another perspective is I'm also Shkabe healer. And so in a translation way, it's like helper. And so what I do is I fire keep at sweat lodges. And one of my roles there is to tend that fire and lift, the grandfathers, grandmothers, and do a lot of the macho heavy work. And the whole time I'm making that space safe and sacred for everyone in the 4 rounds of the sweat lodge. And so I'm taking on a lot of people's stuff the entire time. Just and I feel like that's a lot of maybe what men can relate to is that we take care of things and we take on things. But what's very important is that I'm so grateful for the opportunity out there too, is that they provide me with specific rounds to then release that and for that I can feel too, make sure that once again we're taking care of ourselves. So I think once again it's redefining what that means because being macho and strong and everything isn't necessarily wrong, but it's as we're taking things on and as we're being macho and strong, what are we then doing with all that taken on? Are we filling our cup? Are we healing? Are we doing the things? Are we releasing? Are we making sure we're taking care of ourselves? Or are we maybe avoiding and masking and doing other things too? That then creates problems and harmful approaches for ourselves and our communities and our families too. So it's just, yeah, it's something to look at and just it's really an internal reflection that I think I spend a lot of time doing myself and then I kind of encourage people to do as well too. Just
Thank you, Taylor. I really like the analogy of how you compared working at the sweat lodge and taking on responsibility and also helping others to your perception of masculinity, which is really taking on a lot of other people's emotions as well, taking on a lot of the responsibility and trying to care for others as best as you can. So I would like to also just ask everyone now, what are the challenges you faced with men's mental health under the pressures of gender norms? Beldev?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is that men usually, when they become tired or when they are facing with a problem or a challenge in their personal or in their family life, I have often noticed that they are unable to process the emotions with their partners or within the family. They would rather pick up the phone and talk to another male figure who may be not well versed in giving them the right advice. Let me illustrate with an example. Over the many years of my work with men, when I ask them, well, when you were experiencing disagreements with your wife in the married relationship in the first 5 years, who did you consult with? They said with other men. And then I asked them, well, what did the other men guide you to do? So it was interesting that none of them were able to tell them, go seek a professional counselor. That's number one. That it's not okay to yell and scream, push, shout, and demean her or accuse her or shame her. None of them said that. So that means that the men who are seeking guidance from other men are equally unable to guide them to appropriate responses. So it's not that they don't want to talk about it. They're seeking help from someone who is unable to give them the proper guidance. So that means two men are talking to each other and supporting each other in an unconstructive kind of a role. So that led me to this belief that, okay, so within our society, so one of the things that we did is we went on the radio, talk shows during the daytime, during early mornings, late evenings, and then we just simply talked about the importance of seeking help. What does it mean? The other issue that is very obvious when we look at what are the challenges of men's mental health, we looked at childhood trauma. Many men who were having difficulties with how do you deal with abandonment, how do you deal with being afraid or fearful, and if they were themselves being abused by their father, they then perpetuated the same kind of a response in an disagreement to the partner or to their own children. So, so none of them had any ability to deal with this childhood trauma because they didn't understand that that could be dealt with in the counseling aspect as well. The other issue that was very interesting was that men had this fantastic ability, and some of these men who were in the treatment process with us, that they were able to mix up care and control altogether. They thought that they are very caring towards their partner, and when we asked the partner, they said, no, he's very controlling by doing this. I can illustrate with an example so it becomes really clear. So a man bought a new Mercedes SUV for his wife and told her, here are the keys. I don't want you to work. I want you to take care of the children, stay at home. And if you want to go, here is the credit card. You can buy something, but I don't want you to work. So he thought he was a very caring man. Look, he bought a new Mercedes. He's done everything. Everything is fine. So then we interviewed the wife, she said, I want to work. I feel suffocated in the home. I have a master's in psychology. I don't like to be cooped up in this home. So when we had that discussion with him, he said, so she doesn't like to have a Mercedes? That's how he interpreted. I said, no, 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 that's not what this is. She wants to go out and work because she has studied at a university. She wants to contribute back. She wants to feel useful. And the moment his answer was, oh, so she means having children is not being useful. So when we looked at this whole thing about care and control, we thought, okay, how are men's brains wired? They are wired to do a specific thing. If I give a Mercedes to my wife, I am a caring husband, not realizing that she doesn't need Mercedes. She needs freedom to make her own decisions about her own life that he is not providing. So I think that those kind of things, I think we need to have more discussions, very honest, low level discussions with them to kind of create a change in their mindset that there is an alternative, that there is a different way of looking at the same thing. That yes, we appreciate that you being caring, but actually it's harming her and you're actually being controlling. But in your mind, you demonstrated this care by buying her a Mercedes, but that's not what she needs. So have more communication, find out what she needs so that you both can. So I think those are some key questions that we need. And the other thing that we think why the men's mental health is because they are unable to process that a man can become depressed. And a lot of Punjabi men, and because my experience is only with Punjabi men, so I can't comment on other kind of men, that men are having great difficulty. Why can't I get up and go to work? How come that I am useless now? That why is the doctor saying I can't drive the car because I am depressed? I need to go to work. I can't come to your counseling week after week to get better. So I think those kind of issues are also important that men need to be told by the by the counselors, by the psychiatrists and family doctors that it's okay. In all your life, you worked for a long time. So let's say you worked 60 years in your life. And if you don't work for 6 months, it's not end of the day. That doesn't mean you are a bad father or that you are a bad husband. It just means that, okay, it's time for you to take care of your mental health. And I think lack of understanding that a person can have anxiety, that a person can become depressed, that these are emotions that go up and down, and there are challenges that we may not be able to overcome immediately. I think those are some of the things that we need to be talking about the relationship within their families and especially the relationship with their daughters. I find that within our community, men become very reluctant to sit close to their daughters when they are pre-teens and teens. That there is a kind of no, go talk to your mom, go go do this. But the daughter is expecting that the fathers sit with them, talk to them, engage them, guide them. And that kind of interaction is not there. So I think that we have some work to do in that area as well. But those were some of my kind of observations within the community and how we are trying to tackle it.
Thank you for sharing your observations, Baldev. Definitely, there is this misconception that men can't have mental health issues, which is super untrue. Like everyone can have mental health issues, and it's important to also just communicate your feelings, as you mentioned. Like there's a lack of communication sometimes that leads to just further misunderstanding. And for Brianna, I know that you are a woman that is working in GBV prevention and working with men's mental health. And as Baldev had recently just shared, like his clients spoke to their friends instead of professional therapists. So like, I'm curious to hear how your perspective of the challenges that men face with mental health is, particularly because you are a woman working in this field.
Thank you so much. I was just really appreciative of all the pieces that were just said. And so, yeah, I will speak a little bit to that. But before I do speak a little bit about being a woman in this work, I did just want to also emphasize, I really appreciated the connection to like childhood trauma. I think that's like such an important thing about this kind of intergenerational pass down methods and that relationship even in between like sons and fathers and daughters and lots of things. So I really appreciated that. Something I wanted to also mention is the impact around kind of, yeah, I feel like for women, oftentimes we are a little bit more encouraged to discuss our emotions and vulnerabilities and to share those and to create kind of peer supportive spaces for each other. And yeah, like men don't always have that. Or again, as Baldev was saying, it might be kind of not in a way that's supportive. So this can result in a lot of men being quite isolated, and it could result in self-harm or addictions or mental health, failed relationships. It could result in violence or withdrawing and much more. So again, the men that we work with, again, are predominantly, they are all newcomers. And so for us, around mental health access is pretty interesting because there's a lot of stressors, as I said, as part of this settlement journey that for sometimes are forgotten in kind of like that mental health component of like how did displacement, how did the settlement journey, what about the culture shock and navigating the families in this new country and all the pressures that come. And as Baldev was saying around unresolved kind of traumas and not processed, that's very similar for a lot of the men we work with, that they haven't had the time to process. So not just family problems, but if there was, for example, war or conflict, or they've witnessed, participated, or been victims of violence, or anything, or experiences of that, oftentimes there's no time to process. People are still in survival mode, still, whether it's in a refugee camp, whether it's in the settlement process, whether it's arrival, then it's get a job, get settled, learn the language, things like that. And so there's not really often a space for newcomer and immigrant men to process in a way that understands that journey and process. It's like, where do I begin, right? And so some of the things too that we're seeing is it's not just kind of the finding employment and that impact of like not being able to provide for a family, for example, feeling like potentially a failure if they can't. The fear of the unknown too, as well as like in a Canadian society, like will my family lose tradition or culture? And so there's like that fear element as well. And that also ties, I would say, as well to sometimes we see men who are maybe a little bit more fearful around even like learning or being associated with LGBTQ communities. A lot of countries it's still criminalized, and so there's a lot of fear of unknown. So there's a lot happening in that process that does impact men's mental health. And as Baldev said, it's also just about the ability to make time to access it or in a way that makes sense. In many communities, mental health is very stigmatized, and oftentimes would only be for extreme situations. Or sometimes people will turn to alternative sources like religion or prayer or kind of other practices as well. So seeking out kind of a counselor or a therapist could be really challenging. So some things that I would say have been kind of noted is finding kind of different ways to access mental health supports in maybe non-traditional formats that can ease in kind of those other formats as well. So like our men's group, it's not a therapy session. Our staff are not social workers or therapists, but it creates that space again where vulnerability, where they're practicing, where they're discussing, but they do talk about mental health. They do talk, Baldev, like around depression, around anxiety. How do you notice it in yourself? And just creating a moment for men to connect with themselves and even in a bodily experience like through hiking and art, where those things maybe men wouldn't make time for to explore, right, in the busyness. So having time to do that is really really important. Something we've been noticing is again we work I often also am on a domestic violence kind of committees here in Nova Scotia. Often men don't access therapy until it's through a court system, right? And so that's like there's a preventative measure that we're really missing. And as Amy was saying, as a woman kind of supporting men's work in this, trying to bring that lens as much as I can. So I'm really grateful that I work with immigrant men leading immigrant men's programs, but the idea that we model that together and that we're in conversation around mental health, we're in conversation about the impacts and the differences of gender norms and kind of we can feed and educate each other and work in collaboration. I think it's also important as a woman to be mindful of like when to be in a room and when not to be in a room. There are times that a woman being in a room changes the dynamic of men. And in other times, it's actually a beautiful process of kind of practicing that. So I think it's like a sensitive balance of really being mindful of like men's only spaces can be really beautiful as long as they're with a feminist lens. We don't want to like redo like a boys club kind of thing, but at the same time bringing women in or having that influence, I think it can add this gendered component of kind of emotional sensitivity and things like that. So I just the only other thing I would say, sorry, I apologize, is exploring with mental health, not always naming it mental health. And so being really sensitive of ways that we can call men into conversations through like our groups are called like men talk, for example. Like there is conversations and we don't talk about kind of we talk about stress and like, challenges around fatherhood or relationships and things like that. But we are talking about how does that impact you? What are reactions? How do you process that? What does that feel like? And things like that, and learning different coping mechanisms through action, through art, through activities, through speaking, through music and singing, lots of different ways. So those are some points that I would make, but I really wanted to emphasize the importance of Baldev's points were amazing, and I just really appreciated hearing them.
Thank you so much, Brianna. I have also noticed that a lot of the times you do have to do other activities to really engage men in the discussion surrounding mental health. There's no really direct way to sort of force them into it, but hiking, art therapy definitely are great things that lead to these conversations together. Taylor, would you like to share?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, where do I want to start? I think, well, so I shared at the very top that like pronouns I use are he and they. And to just acknowledge that the they isn't about like subscribing to a certain community or anything, but it's acknowledging the different energies within me, and that it's almost like a I can sit in many spaces because of that thing. And so I do have an easier time sitting in different spaces because I can play on what needs to come out. That being said, I think what I've really heard from you and everyone sharing today though is that, and it's the same for me too, that it comes down to trust, is that people need trust to talk about things. And so I've sat in mixed groups or men's only groups and whatever too. And what I really see with like the men's only groups is that the trust is there. And so it feels comfortable for people to share, which I think is so needed. But actually to highlight what Baldev said too was that without like a good facilitator even, it doesn't need to be a title or anything, but someone to facilitate that conversation, it does, like Brianna was saying too, that it turns into more of a toxic cycle of just repeating patterns that we've been doing for years and years and years. So there needs to be a space where we can openly talk about these things, but there also needs to be a facilitator to just like guide the conversation in a healthy way to be like, yeah, of course you're frustrated. Of course this is like hard. Of course this is like the worst thing in the world, but not losing sight of like our values and what we believe as just people in general. So I think trust for sure needs to be there. And yeah, I think also, like I said, like having a facilitator to like guide that conversation in a good way is also key. To then follow up though is that, like I said, like I've worked in mental health for well over a decade, and so I also do firmly believe in like the support of like a more formalized support as well, like mental health groups and individual talk therapy and all those things. I think it's all really beneficial. So it's navigating what feels right for you. But I think maybe like the key takeaway and something that I hope people can walk into is like don't lose sight of like your path and like why you're even talking about it in the first place. Like you're talking about it because you want to hear, because you want to do things differently. Um, there we can hold space for like the all the emotions and all the frustration and all the other stuff, but don't get lost in that too. Always come back to like why you're talking about it because you want to heal. So yeah, support's good.
Thanks, Taylor. I definitely agree that a good facilitator makes all of the difference. They're the ones who really try to read out the conversation, try to make the environment as safe as possible, as confidential as possible. And they also relate to their own experiences. So that really helps with helping men come out of their shell and just share their own experiences as well. And I know that all of the speakers we have today, you all work with so many different people from different cultures. So I'm wondering, how do different cultures vary in promoting positive masculinities? And also, when interacting with people from different cultures, what culturally sensitive strategies or culturally responsive tools do you use to engage with them? Baldev?
Yes. So I think there are a couple of things that we have experimented with for last 30 plus years. One of the things what we have kind of look at is evolving gender roles. So we started with talking to men about to what extent are they helpful to their partners at home. Very simple question. To what extent are they? Do they think that if we ask their partners, would they say that yes, my husband is helpful to me? And in what ways are you helpful? Are you helpful in terms of in the kitchen? Are you helpful in terms of taking care of the children? Are you helpful in terms of school work with the children? Are you helpful in terms of taking children to soccer, swimming, and all these extracurricular activities? In what ways are you helpful? What additional roles, other than being a provider to the partner, have you done? So that's a bigger kind of a discussion that we need to be having within our community. And perhaps in other communities, we can also encourage to what extent are you challenging the traditional male versus female role, women at home taking care of children at home, men going out and work and bringing money. So these are the traditional roles. To what extent in Canada are we kind of evolving these gender roles? The second thing is that how does culture uh, affect and how do men use some of the traditional cultural practices to their advantage? For example, would my like if I was in Canada and my I was a young couple at one time and my parents were living, would my parents say that I don't like you to have a girl child? I would rather have all boys in your family. To what extent am I being able to have some meaningful conversation with my parents? I say, no, I love boys as much as I love girls in our family. It really doesn't matter what we have. We can have two girls, we can have one girl, we can have one boy, two boys. I really don't care. I can have all girls, but girls are equally valued. Am I able to have some meaningful dialogue around creating an equality within my family that girls and boys are equal in everything that we do, even in terms of rearing, in terms of giving them responsibility, in terms of the discipline, in terms of everything else? Or are we saying that a girl's honor is attached to the family name, therefore she cannot be allowed to step outside of the home other than going to school and coming back? So I think those are some discussions we need to have from a cultural perspective to this. One of the difficulties that I encountered during my tenure as a CEO, and I just retired last year, the CEO of Punjabi Community Health Services, is one of the studies, and if you Google it on Google, the research study, it is a study that was done by St. Michael's Hospital in GTA, in Greater Toronto area, along with Punjabi Community Health Services, that wanted to kind of figure out if within the Sikh community in the Greater Toronto area, the Sikh women were participating in abortion if they found out that the baby is a girl child. So a study was done and they found out, yes, Sikh women participated in abortions when they found out. And then they came up with this whole thing about these were the first generation immigrants from India. They did it and they already had two girls and they didn't want a third girl. That kind of a thing. So, but the basic thing was, yes, Sikh women participated in having abortions when they found out that another child coming into their family is also a girl child. So then I ask these researchers a question. Okay, that I can understand because the mothers were from India, they grew up there, they came with that traditional mindset. But what about those young women who have been here for a long time? They're born and raised to Canada. They went to the universities in Canada and they are born and raised. Would they participate in the same kind of thing? Go back and do another study to figure it out whether those second generation Punjabi women born and raised in Canada will also participate in abortion. Guess what? They also participated. So, which means that culture has a very strong influence and hold on people's psyches for a long time. So, maybe the third generation may stop this altogether, but just imagine the first generation, the second generation is still participating. So this means that we have to encourage a lot of discussions within the community to have a enormous amount of discussion within the communities that this is totally unacceptable within the realms of Canada, and that we need to kind of do better. The third thing that I think we want to have some discussion is how are we raising our children? Are we raising our boys different than our girls? Are we saying to our boys that, okay, you are now 10 years old, go wash dishes? your sister washed the dishes yesterday. Now it's your turn to wash the dishes. Are we saying that? Or are there some protective female family members and male family members who will say, no, 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 this is not a boy's job. So no, 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 he's not going to do it. Or asking them to do vacuum cleaning around the house, or asking them to take the garbage out for mom, or whatever else that we can give them chores to do. Are those chores within girls and boys differently? Can we then have a discussion within our homes? I think the cultural part is very important, because in a family where boys are given preferential treatment and they are not allowed to do anything, while girls are at a very young age asked to learn how to cook and to clean and to help the mom around the house, they then become imbibed with those values, whereas boys tend to say, it's not my job. And then once they get married, they run into all kind of different problems at that time. So I think those are some cultural kind of things. And then also the language and communication. To what extent are we saying within our households, what kind of a communication are we teaching our boys to be respectful, to not use F words in the home, and how are they texting to each other? How are they texting to their friends who happen to be girls? Are they using the same kind of language, or is that language sensitive? Has parents sat down and told them this is unacceptable language to a woman? How dare you use it? Those are some of the things I think it's very important from a cultural perspective, that if we are in Canada, and that if we want to create a peaceful Canada, and if we want to create a gender equal Canada, then we must start it within our own homes and have some meaningful conversations with our children. That's the thing that we have been able to kind of have some massive discussions on the radio programs to talk about, and giving some very helpful tips within the conversation, that okay, you can sit down and you can ask, and then ask a child, a 15, 16-year-old, do you think that in Canada, a girl can become anything she wants? Or do you think that there are some limitations to what a girl can do? Can she become an astronaut? Can she become a fighter pilot? Can she become a crane operator at a construction site? What do you think? And let's find out what the boys are within our own families, what views they hold, and how can we change the narrative within our own families. I think these are some tips and suggestions where we will be able to challenge some of these traditional segregated gender roles within our families.
Thanks, Beldav. And you mentioned that you really need to have these discussions in the home. But you're seeing that even the second generation of immigrants sometimes still uphold these inequitable thoughts on gender. So I'm curious, how do you culturally engage them despite the need for them to hold on to the traditional perceptions of gender? Like, how would you still engage them if they are reluctant to change and reluctant to gender equity?
Yeah, so a couple of suggestions that I can share with you. One of the things that we have done is that we have created an organization within our community called Ladaliyan. And this is a young women, second generation young women's organization. And every time a girl is born in the GTA, they send a card to the family, congratulating them. And they distribute pink laddus. Laddu is a sweet, a kind of a sweet within our community. And so when a girl is born, the parents are encouraged to distribute pink laddus to all the relatives, because when a boy is born, they distribute yellow laddus to everyone in their relatives. So the community is encouraged to celebrate with a big fanfare the birth of a girl child. So that's those kind of examples. And then every time in January, there is a big celebration. All the girls' parents are invited through radio program. It's an open invitation to come to a banquet hall where they can come and they can celebrate the birth of a child. So you can bring your daughter, you can bring your granddaughter, and then a big kind of a celebration is being held in that banquet hall. So those are smaller kind of examples where women have become more empowered to talk about how women should be raised within. And this is, I am actually seeing a lot of changes happening now as a result of these kind of positive advocacy efforts on the community's behalf.
Thank you, Baldav. Those sound like amazing initiatives. Like, I don't even think they sound small to me. They personally sound really big because even like the smallest little things that you do can make the greatest difference. So it's great to hear that there's such initiatives out there. And thank you so much for sharing about the Sikh community and all of the different perceptions that are going on there and all of the challenges that you're navigating through and some of the small hopes that you also bring aboard. And for Brianna, I know that you work with a lot of diverse immigrants in YMCA. So I would love to hear how different cultures vary when you're promoting positive masculinities and what culturally responsive tools and strategies you're using to engage with these communities.
Thank you, Amy. Amy, I did notice the chat. Are we waiting on that, or there was a question in the chat?
Oh, yes. Noman, please feel free to ask any question, and then in the Q&A portion, we're going to share all of the questions we have written down.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. I think, yeah, it's really hard for us because at our center, we don't have one community or one particular cultural or religious background. So the only kind of shared experience is shared being immigrant or newcomers to Canada or refugees to Canada. So it's really, for us, being culturally sensitive or responsive is really challenging because we have to be mindful that our groups are not one group. Even in we do have an African men's group too, and even that within that, there's such differences of language and religion and culture. There's just a lot of diversity. So for us, when we're talking about being culturally sensitive or culturally responsive, it's trying to create space for difference, create space to recognize and celebrate the differences, while also kind of helping to tie that in. So for example, when we talk about masculinity or the pressures and expectations in for example, that could be a question that's often asked in the men, like, what does it mean to be a man? What are the expectations in your culture? Men get to hear kind of similarities across culture, but also differences. And that kind of really helps to shape the idea of like, and they can do that in lots of different ways, whether it's like we've created physical boxes of art. We've also, put in weights in a backpack where they're putting like symbolic, like the pressures in a bag. But then we also discuss like what are things they wish they could let go of, or what do they wish that their sons, for example, or like the future generation didn't have to carry? Like what's the weights that they wish weren't there? And so one of the things about being culturally sensitive is it can help around when you're talking across diversity to help men recognize that there isn't just like one form of masculinity, and there's also not just one form of like positive masculinity, but there is definitely things that everyone believes should be let go of. There are harmful things that we can agree on. So being kind of in our way, when we're talking about being culturally sensitive, we allow for that space of difference and conversation, but also tying in that like violence or harmful practices or things that are just unnecessary. Those are the things that we really want to let go of. Sorry, I just realized I have to plug in my computer. And the other things that I wanted to emphasize as well is finding activities that center and celebrate culture while you're having those kind of challenging conversations can bring people in, even if it's just in the food that you're serving, even if it's in kind of celebrating holidays together and learning about it while you're having, discussions. So finding ways to center people in areas they're comfortable with while you're also having those difficult conversations. So if you can, play music that's culturally sensitive, if you can be mindful of like prayer time and like pause if people need that, if you can try to go to where men are already gathering, or shift the times that make sense, those are really helpful. For us, language really matters too. Interpretation is really important to create kind of accessibility of participation, but that's also very challenging when you have multiple languages in the same room. So just I'm saying yes, and also it's a challenge. But also modeling the behavior. So for me, I think one of the most important things is the people. I think Taylor also said this, the facilitators, like ensuring that for our team, it's not just about hiring men, or it's not just about hiring people who like understand the concept, but that they're going to embody and model that in their practices and their lives. So even, for example, when I come into a program, it's not just about what we're saying, it's modeling how we interact with each other. For example, I'm not the one who brings in Baldev coffee and tea and snacks. We've like been strategic in that, and like we don't want that perception to be that, I'm just the food, or things like that, or I'm only brought in to talk about women's issues. Like we want to make sure that there's kind of this like modeling of behavior. One thing I will highlight is I do think there's such a power to culturally specific groups or religious specific groups, and that's amazing that Valdev is doing that, and I think Taylor also is doing some of that as well. But finding ways to create groups also like survivor specific groups or religious specific groups, and recognize that men are there's intersectionality in their identity as well. And so just being mindful that different men may find accessing a different point of contact for a group. Maybe like some want to be in a religious specific or linguistic specific or a cultural specific, and others don't. And so just like embracing that there's lots of different ways we can be sensitive. The last thing I will mention is just highlighting a bit of what Baldev said about like challenging gender norms. Really beautiful activity that one of the staff that I work with did, Yuang Maduk. He really and acknowledged that there's a lot of immigrant men who are here alone, and that they don't have the tools of cooking and things like that, and that it was a discussion. So he actually created a cooking program with the men to explore not only just cooking around traditional foods and like the importance of that, and kind of like that feeling of home and culture, but also like the gender component of that labor, of like the men, realize it's actually really hard to figure out what to cook together. It's actually like takes a lot of preparation and kind of that appreciation, but also giving them the tools that they can do that too. So I think doing those activities, but still bringing in that cultural sensitivity, finding foods that like, they also want to learn how to do. Can they share their traditions? Can there be storytelling? Can they talk about the importance of food while also talking about gender and also about gender norms? And the last thing I'll say is also I think it's important when we're navigating cultural sensitivities and differences that there are going to be times that people don't agree in diverse groups. Particularly around religious beliefs and values and practices. So I always encourage, and I would suggest to groups to not get stuck in debates around values per se, but centering kind of like everyone has the right to live free of violence, everyone has the right to care, and everyone has the right to choose how they want to kind of live and exist within or outside of kind of gender roles. So you have a decision of yourself as long as it doesn't take away or harm others. So that's something we also navigate a lot, is like if as you can decide on yourself, if like around your kind of role in a family, but you can't control someone else's, and like you also have to navigate the understanding of like not impacting others or taking away rights of others. So we talk a lot about like laws and human rights, and for our groups, when we talk about gender equity, let's just say, or violence against women or homophobia, we often start with something that is more personal. So like a lot of our men navigate racism, so they want to talk about racism, they want to talk about religious discrimination, they talk about the feelings of that and how that impacts them, and then we move on to other things like gender. So what about women's experiences? What about kind of the right to be who you are in general? So it kind of like ties it a little bit better to like people to have that empathy of other people's experiences because they know what it feels like to experience oppression, to experience things, and then they can be more empathetic. So creating empathy, I think, is even if there's difference in opinion, it's people can agree that no one wants to feel that way or cause that harm to others. So I think those are things that I would say around that.
Thank you, Brianna. Yeah, I definitely find that a theme in your tool is really just finding commonality, finding a theme to relate to, finding different groups that all of these men can be a part of, and indirectly mention GBV prevention or indirectly mention mental health supports. So that's a great way to engage men and also creating that empathetic sphere. Taylor, would you like to share?
Yeah, for sure. I think anytime I've done any cultural work, and I've had the privilege and opportunity to sit with, yeah, many groups from kind of all over the world, which is cool. I always go back to like my community psychology days of just never going into a group with an agenda or like the answer. I think anytime I sit with anyone, I honestly just shut my mouth and I listen. Because for me, like I want to listen very carefully, like what you're saying, how you're saying it, what you're intending to say. And then it's yeah, honing in on that like facilitation role of like, okay, then let's have a discussion, right? So it's kind of just bringing in like my 2 cents whenever I can. Um, so yeah, so when I start listening and we've already talked about it today, but like people will say one thing, and especially like language is so important, like so important because if we're talking about even within translation or what the meaning sometimes oftentimes gets very lost in what we're actually trying to say. So then it's the discussion of okay, well this is what you said. Let's talk about like what that means and does that like actually land for you? Does that make sense? And then we get on that because exactly like we said, like any like everyone's perspectives are different, and when we're talking about culture too, like it's we could mean like, well, yeah, like I think I love the was it the BMW analogy? I'm giving you everything. I'm a caring person, but is that caring in your lens too? So it's just like it's listening and learning and trying to understand as well too. Um, yeah, so and gender roles, I love that too. I want to talk about that as well too because with my kiddo, like, um, I've always raised her with like you want to build stuff with me? Awesome. Like let's go put together the furniture and let's get the screwdrivers out for sure. You want to also help me cook dinner? Let's cook. Like it's showing all of those and it's good for her, but it's also good for her circles to see that like people can do all roles that are just like helpful. I think that's really what it is. But what once I've like listened to groups and once I've kind of like done tried to understand a little bit closer of like where people are at, my introduction to like preventing violence or gender-based things, I oftentimes use humor and share. I mean, you probably already clocked this for me, but just like personal stories to like make it connect. And so I remember one time I was with like a men's group and um the topic of dating came up. It's like, well, we want to be dating and we want to connect with women and yada yada. So then I did a very subtle thing of like, oh, you know what, my dating experience, I cooked a meal for someone and I cooked the meal and I did the dishes and she was so appreciative of that. I'm like, oh, you cooked? And I was like, yeah. And like women like that, guys. Like they like when you cook and clean. Like, really? But so once they're kind of hooked into that and like that interest is piqued, then it becomes the conversation though around the roles, but also really the boundaries though, that you got to continue that conversation of like, yeah, I got an in because I cooked and took care of someone in a different way that's maybe not traditional. But there's also boundaries to that, is that you've set up a safer space for someone. So there's roles and responsibilities for that too. And you got to keep that good way going the entire time. So it's yeah. So it's really interesting to like listen, understand what people are going through and yeah, try to just make connections wherever you can. Oh, and the one story that I forgot to share too, and it comes out in different ways, but I want to share that I got through with my dad. My dad's the kind of guy that doesn't talk about any emotions ever. And it was one time him and I are doing like electrical work in my old house, and we're just ripping apart wires and manly man stuff. And he just like we weren't even talking about anything. And then he's just like, you know what? I've had a hard day today. I was like, oh yeah, tell me more about it, man. And then we just started going, right? So I think it's exactly like everyone's been saying, like whatever entry point you have to just start the conversation, lean into that facilitator role, like listen, pay attention, and then see that someone's opening up, and then try to make those connections wherever you can. And yeah, do what you can. Thanks.
Thank you, Taylor. Yeah, I completely agree. There's always just that one entry point that really allows you access into more serious discussions about masculinity and positive mindset. So that's great. And I want to ask Beldev, can you share what programming efforts are in Canada to empower men and boys and any useful resources available for men and boys that you think is really important?
So I think one of the things what we have experimented with is we have started a campaign a couple of years ago. Why are good men silent? So what this campaign basically means is that if you see a domestic violence taking place in a family, what is your role as a man supporting that family? Are you quiet? Are you not going to intervene? Are you not going to take out the man and say, "Hey, let's sit down at Tim Hortons and let's have a discussion"? I mean, violence, hitting your wife is not going to solve anything. In fact, your children is going to become that much traumatized, and they're going to have difficulty, concentrating on education. They're going to have their own fears and all kind of other issues. So what thing is so that is a campaign that we have launched, and we are seeing just the beginning part because campaigns take a long time over 10, 15 years to see any meaningful kind of but it has generated a lot of discussions within the community around what is the role of other men to stop violence against women and also to provide support to this person who is actually doing the harm in the family. What can other men do to become supportive to this particular person? Book a counseling appointment, take him out, have sit down with them, come up with some different strategies to see how they can help. So that's one of the campaigns that we have. The other thing is that we have noticed that cultures that have a significant generational trauma tend to have difficulties with substance use. We are one such community, the Sikh community is one such community, both in India and also in Canada, which experiences higher rates of substance abuse. Now, we don't need to have any large kind of discussion. We know from research, we know from historical data that substance abuse causes enormous amount of tensions within family. It disrupts husband-wife relationships and it disrupts the family dynamics, the children, and all that other kind of cohesion. So, which means that we have to talk about the reasons for generational trauma. We need to find out why a community en masse is experiencing enormous amount of difficulty with substance abuse. And then how do we within the community create a dialogue of discussion what trauma is, because it has something to do with mental health. But if you say we're going to talk today about mental health, nobody will come. But if we talk about substance use, a lot of people will come. If we say, well, today we just are going to look at how are our boys doing versus our girls in our community. And then people will say, yes, I am having trouble with my boy. He is behaving in an obnoxious way. Let's go to this seminar and let's find out what they have to say about girls. And then you have an opportunity to talk about why are boys within a particular community not doing as well as girls are doing. So there is a discrepancy, and to a greater extent, the research studies that I have read, and one was from Australia, where they demonstrated that in all communities in Australia, girls are doing much better in education than boys are. So there is something not so nice going on all across the world with boys' education, boys' kind of responsibilities. And a lot of thinkers have their own ideas about why this is happening, and some of these thinkers are blaming feminist movement that they have become too much feminist. That's why the boys are kind of floundering. All those issues. But I think we have an opportunity where we need to have a meaningful discussion with parents to see how they can support their sons rather than criticizing them. Hey, you aren't going to school. What is wrong with you? Look at your sister. She is doing all the homework and you're not doing the homework. That's not going to get us anywhere. Blaming is not going to get us anywhere. So we need to have an opportunity for a dialogue to see uh, across Canada. And I think those are some of the research studies that we need to be sharing with our communities. Why are boys having difficulties in school? Why are having boys such a difficulty generally behaving? And there is a lot of no evidence that a lot of boys are becoming isolated, lonely, getting addicted to social media, pornography, unhealthy uh, extracurricular activities, which are basically watching, consuming, lot of consumption, and not having meaningful interactions with anybody else in their with their friends or with anybody else within their no intimate partner relationships. So I think there is a lot of opportunities for us now to really engage families in a dialogue about how we cannot just simply sit and wait that things will get better or some miracle will happen. I think we as individuals within our own respective communities need to kind of slowly start to engage with other men, with other families. That look, I mean, if you see across what is happening across your community, look at how good your daughters are performing versus your sons are performing. If you see a discrepancy, well, let's look at it why that discrepancy exists, because opportunities are available to both genders, but one is taking advantage and one isn't. And what might be the reasons for boys to be underperforming in education and in all the other spheres? I think those are some of the ways that we are trying to take a look within our own communities to see how can we support our boys to really excel as much as our daughters are excelling.
Thank you, Baldev. Yeah, I think there definitely needs to be more research into why we're treating them differently and how we can sort of um, normalize treating them in the same manner that they grow up to be all responsible and accountable for their own actions. Um, Brianna, did you want to share what programming efforts are available in Canada and what resources are available for men and boys?
Yeah, so there's so much, and I just want to emphasize that there might be people in this room who are doing men and boys work. So if you are, keep doing it. You're amazing. There's not a possibility for us to kind of announce everyone. I do want to acknowledge that something I know we've partnered with White Ribbon in the past and learned a lot from their expertise as well. But also I want to emphasize here, and I'm going to speak in Nova Scotia too. We have incredible people doing men and boys work and who have been for a while. Nova Scotia was unfortunately, the location of one of the largest mass casualties in Canada, which was rooted in gender-based violence. And so a mentor and friend of mine who also does men and boys work, Brian Berganza, did do a lot of research around kind of why that part of the component of the mass casualties. So I would like to acknowledge that. There's also things like the People's Clinic with Robert Wright, who like focus on kind of men's work and healing. YWCA, YMCA. But I want to emphasize that also groups that you don't traditionally think of, like organizations that serve newcomers, immigrants, and refugees, formerly sometimes called the settlement sector. So there's actually incredible work being done. And for us, I would like to emphasize like our Men and Boys program has been ongoing. So we do guys groups in schools. We do it as a club. We do it after school. We have this, like, as I mentioned, this leadership project for 16 to 25-year-olds because that's a very crucial age where it's often left out. They're like, in that adult, some are getting married, some are not, but it's in this strange phase where they often drop out of youth programs, but they don't join adult men's groups. So it's kind of this pivotal moment of like often that's when people can get pulled into, groups or influences. It's also when people are experimenting potentially with alcohol, drugs, university pressures, employment challenges. It's just a really interesting part of life. So we focus on creating champions and in a leadership group is how we frame that group. And so they do different things, and some of them have created like videos by men for men. They've done art projects, photography, but they've also literally made tables about violence against women and gone into gyms and gone into university spaces to like teach people about it, to see that their role in taking action. And I think that's a really core component is creating opportunities not just to discuss, but for men to like step up in a way that is led by them. So for us, it's like young men led projects that they decide what they learn about the topic, they engage, they do some self-reflection, and then they try to come together in this idea that like I can take action and I should take action in different ways. So I think that's, and even like we did a tailoring project once, like around sewing. And currently they're exploring it through soccer. So through soccer and masculinity and kind of like how can we explore that? Um, as I mentioned before, we have our regular adult men's groups that meet regularly. And as I said, it's through discussion and participatory processes, which has been really helpful. Um, and I want to also mention, as I said, so we do our local work, but we are connected to this national gender-based violence strategy for agencies serving immigrants. So it's IRCC's national strategy, not the National Action Plan. We're actually working this year on creating a free tool and resource for people around engaging newcomer and immigrant men and boys around gender-based violence prevention. So we're going to be looking across Canada, and if some of you are doing that, please reach out around who's already doing this work. What are kind of those common practices, and how can we create a little bit of tools to let other people start doing that work instead of having to recreate the wheel and just like learn from each other. And so that's something we're working on. So it's not quite done, but we are working on it, and it will be free and available to anyone to use with some like templates and ideas. So again, and it will be available on our national website. So ngbv.ca is the national gender-based violence strategy for agencies serving immigrants. But other than that, yeah, just there's also incredible work in the immigrant serving sector.
Thank you so much for sharing, Brianna. The national mapping strategy sounds really amazing because that's something that MMC also wanted to get into. And that's actually also something that Never Network to Eliminate Violence. They're based in BC. They're also working on a mapping strategy. So I think it would be good to connect later on that. And Taylor, did you want to share what programming efforts are available and useful resources, especially by White Ribbon?
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Um, yeah, I also want to just like acknowledge the like I love the approach that we're all kind of taking, and yeah, the one note I just wrote down here too is yeah, we've shamed people for way too long, um, and so that yeah, that whole idea of just like stop doing this, why can't you do it more? Like we need to stop doing that, honestly, um, and really just like engage people in a more kind way, I think, right? So exactly. So it's even like something that I hold dear to my heart too, because in ceremony specifically, some teachings is that you can't be using substances. I've heard of even like 5 days before a sweat lodge. And so of course I respect that teaching, and I wouldn't go into that space, or I wouldn't bring someone to that space too. That's the teaching there. All to say though is the spaces that I do go into, it's very much like if you're using the hour before, you're still welcome here because this might be your one and only shot for you to just like see a different way of doing things. So once again, just coming from that like, you know, putting pause on like shaming people and just meeting people where they're at. And I mean, of course, if they're under the influence, like we're not going to get as far as we would get if we were, clear-minded. But it's once again just like, okay, I'm not gonna call you down for where you're at. I'm not gonna harm you more because you're already hurting. Um, so how can we just have a conversation and keep it going? So yeah, so I love that I hear that within what's been discussed already today and just yeah, taking care of one another for sure. Um, so with like that, calling people in approach, yeah, that's White Ribbon. It's kind of what we do. So we do all sorts of different things. And maybe I'll share a little bit about White Ribbon as well too. It started 1991, 2 years after the attack at École Polytechnique in Montréal. And there's yeah, a mass massacre there. And at the time, it was a lot of people were saying, well, this is a women's issue. Women need to sort that out. And there were a group of men that showed up and said, no, 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 this is everybody's issue. Like we're here as well to use our voice to raise awareness, not to do it for you, but to stand beside you. And so it was literally just people showing up, handing out white ribbons and saying, hey, we're here. Since then, we still do, we stay true to our roots in that way, but we do large scale campaigns where we launch um, like yearly campaign videos. So we're gonna have a new one coming out probably yeah, end of November, maybe December. Um, and then but also just doing lots of programming with wonderful organizations that are on webinar today too. And so if it's like lesson plans or resources or workplace work, like we're all about just like engaging with people in a kinder way and seeing how we can work together, like collab and once again listen from each other's experiences and do this in a good kind of more equal way as well too. So feel free to check us out, whiteribbon.ca. We got all sorts of stuff. You'll get lost on the website because there's so much to noodle around with, but have fun getting lost, 'cause that's part of it. Um, but on that note too, the last thing I want to share as well is that um, while you're consuming that and getting lost in the online space, my work is all virtual. I'm always virtually doing stuff. Disconnect from that as well too. Go outside, look at a tree. Yeah, go have a good chat with someone. Yeah, go down to Hortons and get a coffee or tea and just catch up with people, right? Because although it's good to like learn and inform each other, there's also a lot of learning and informing and just chatting. So yeah, make rich for that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Taylor. And all of the speakers, definitely feel free to put the link to your organization below. If you want to share any resources as well, you can put it in the Zoom chat. And thanks to Frank Cohen in the Zoom chat for promoting www.dudesclub.ca and also Next Up program if you're interested in learning more about them. And then on to our final question for this webinar is how can we break the stigma of men and boys seeking help? And also, how can we create a brave or healthy space for them to seek help? Beldev?
Okay, so one of the things that what we need to do is look at whether we are able to provide opportunities for men to have off clinical discussions in the community. So a lot of communities who come to Canada, they become panic stricken when social workers take out their intake forms and ask them to fill it out, their name, their date of birth, when they came to Canada, when they got married, how they got married, and what this and this. So this information terrifies them in two ways. In my professional social worker career, I have noticed that families become very panic stricken because they are concerned that somehow this information the police forces will get hold of. And as a result, they are very reluctant to seek help, But in our clinical training as social workers, we need their name, their date of birth, their phone numbers, email addresses, and stuff like that in order for us to start compiling in our database a name once the person comes again so that we are able to open up some kind of a file. So that's one bigger problem, one challenge. So when we say that we are able to have some dialogue, which means that is there a mechanism in in our professional organizations where somebody can say, look, I want to talk to you, but I don't want you to take any kind of notes. Are we allowing that to happen? Is there a policy that a person can talk to us without becoming a client of ours? If that can be done, I can guarantee you immediately there will be an influx of clients in your agency. So what is holding us back for the immigrant community is that they are scared that their PR status will be in jeopardy, that somehow Revenue Canada will find out that they were going to seek information for mental health, that somehow they will never be able to get a job because they have seen a psychotherapist for their depression. So all these issues that we have in Canada are actually detrimental to newcomers because they have not acculturated well into our confidentiality and our privacy rules and regulations. They don't understand, even though we are good at terms of explaining to them, but even still they are very reluctant. And so we wanted to create a welcoming environment in our organization at Punjabi Community Health Services in Toronto, that you can come in and we will not take notes until you tell us to take notes. If you are satisfied with our service and you say now you can start taking notes, we will take notes. So that's the first thing. Are we as service providers actually sensitive and caring to provide services to a community that is terrified of a professional service? Because back home they go and they talk and they come and nobody takes any kind of notes. Here, the first thing that a police officer does, takes out his notebook, asks you for your name and phone number, puts date, and then starts recording everything that you say. That terrifies people. So I think those are some key issues in terms of how do we kind of create information for some of these men. I think we need to create safe and brave space for men to be able to express themselves. And even during when I was running a group, and I know that we are coming very close to our time, and just this last comment from me, when a man said that Canada's justice system is racist, the police is racist, and they have arrested me for no change, we allowed this man to vent out, and then we kind of managed it after the session. Then we sat down with him, and then we debriefed with him, and we explained how the judicial system, the legal system, the policing system in Canada works. But in some of the programs that I am aware of, this kind of expression of emotions that I'm angry at the police, I'm angry at the justice system is not allowed. That is seen as the person not accepting responsibility towards intimate partner violence against their partner. So I think that when we talk about cultural sensitivity, it's a total different kind of a game because people have historical colonial experiences that is deeply embedded in their DNA from generations. And just to say that things are all hunky-dory and everything will be fine, it's not going to happen. So we need to really look at the essence. The essence is that only the Western civilization is hell-bent on confidentiality and consent and right to privacy and freedom. All other civilizations work and function differently. So I think I'm going to leave it with that because we are running out of time. Otherwise, we can talk about it at some other time, little bit later around cultural sensitivity because most of my life in Canada worked around diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Baldev. I completely understand the hesitancy to share personal information, especially when newcomers want to get their PR or there's this concern about their personal information out there. So yeah, it's a great point that you make about like the cultural norms and differences in keeping the information public or private. Thank you for that. Brianna, did you want to share how you might break the stigma of men and boys seeking help and how you create brave or healthy spaces for them to speak out?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think one is just trying to make it accessible. And so like how you invite people into those spaces. Again, what's the thing that's going to draw people into a space? Because before someone can even explore whether they need help, they need to be able to access you first. And for the clients that we work with, it's not often they're coming for a mental health support originally. They might be connected. So, like finding ways to make it accessible. How can you reach the populations that may be avoiding those types of services? How can you meet them where they're at? How can you meet them in ways that they are comfortable gathering in and slowly kind of incorporate kind of mental health supports into that? Think also once there's spaces, it's just also about, for us, it's not just about what we're talking about that creates brave spaces. It's from the moment people walk in the doors, right? So it's like making sure you remember people's names, welcoming people, having like coffee, making it a warm space, just like small details around just like creating that space builds bravery, builds the ability. So it's not just about like we dive into it. We do like a check-in circle. We do kind of get to know each other. We spend a lot of time, even sometimes our adult programs, we spend a lot of time doing like icebreakers and games and just things to kind of loosen up to get to know each other before we start talking about those heavy topics. Sometimes that's singing, sometimes that's games or whatever, but we always try because walking into a room, even just as anybody, but men in particular, to start opening up and being vulnerable is like scary. So you have to build trust and relationships first. They have to see that it's okay. They have to see it in the facilitators, how they normalize it, how are they talking about things, how are they bringing their own stories into this or their feelings or vulnerabilities. But it's also the interaction of how you're designing programming. So I strongly emphasize for people who are doing group programming to get some facilitation training around participatory processes, around kind of how to design those spaces. And then it's again, I really appreciate both Taylor and Baldev have said this in different points about meeting men where they're at. So like not calling them out, calling them in, kind of meeting people where they're at, creating that space, like come as you are and you're still welcome and we're still going to talk about things. Yes, like there's, of course we have to like challenge things that are harmful. Like we don't want to allow, like we don't allow homophobia, for example, or racism, but we recognize that there might be causes or root causes why someone might act that way. So we might meet with them like on the side or just like have a conversation about these things. But yeah, we don't like exclude people from conversations. And I think about creating brave spaces or braver spaces for men. It's a great about creating that peer supportive element. And I like that Taylor said not being like an expert coming in with an agenda, but facilitating processes that allow men to have that peer supportive space while also a facilitator is gently guiding that to make sure it doesn't like spiral into some other unhealthy like situation. But at the same time, a skilled facilitator will be able to do that to bring in the wisdom and expertise because for our men, who attend our program, they're coming for other reasons too. It's not they're getting the mental health kind of support and connection, but they're actually coming for friendship. They're actually coming for language practice. They're coming because there's no other space that they can talk about these issues. They're coming for that kind of peer supportive space that they can talk about the challenges and stigmas, but they're also learning about gender-based violence and mental health and services. So I think those types of things can really help. And I do want to comment because I know it's going to come up in the questions, but also like acknowledging that men can experience challenges, men can be victims of abuse, men can experience a lot of hardships too, and just like normalizing that and normalizing like we've had clients who've been hospitalized for mental health issues. And that was really, really hard at one point for some of our men to process. So normalizing that, yeah, absolutely. Sometimes people need help, right? And that sometimes is a professional service. Let's, anyway, so I think I'll leave it there because of time, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brianna. Taylor?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. Yeah, I'll jump in quick to you. It's just the very similar things. It's just that I can have discussions with whoever I come across, and I can create that safer space, braver space, and break down that stigma. But I yeah, fully am on board with like if I build that trust, if I've gained that trust, and then popping them into a system that the systemic things eliminate that trust immediately, I think that's really challenging. So it's also that advocacy, like we've talked about as well too, to be like, well, how can we once they're in the door, once I've like even helped them come to the door, how can I maintain that trust and maintain that safety for them too? Because I think that's almost the worst thing is that you've given someone that trust and then just systemically, not like intentionally, but you're now breaking it as well too. So I think navigating all that's really important. And just the last little note that I wanted to share is something that I learned in the mental health world when I worked in a physical office was that anyone that comes in our door for just like the random walk in, I was always taught that that person, there's a good chance that they walked past our office 20, 40 times thinking about, you know what, I think I kind of want to go in there one day. I think I want to do it. And today might be the day. And so after the 40th time, they decide, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to muster all my courage and I'm going to do it. And so with that understanding, I've always met people with like just the utmost kindness and just like acknowledging that bravery because there's nothing worse than like you've contemplated it 40 times and then you go in and then you get shut down. That's crushing. So yeah, meet people with kindness for sure, everyone. But no, thanks for the space. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. So both Brianna and Taylor all emphasized the idea of kindness and also the idea of acceptance and trust, for sure, trust. That is so important when people are sharing their personal stories, their personal journeys. They need to be able to trust you that you can keep the information confidential. And as Baldev mentioned, like that you're recording it with your mind instead of a notepad and that you're making them feel comfortable that it's not going elsewhere outside of the room. And for that, we're going to move into the Q&A session now. I know in the chat, Napoleon had asked a very large number of men from immigrant backgrounds experience domestic violence, but do not speak out because no one listens to them or they apparently in Canada, what can we do to help them? Baldev, would you like to share?
Yeah. So we experience the same thing within our own community as well. There are a lot of men who go through this kind of a thing. So one of the things is that the way we have addressed this, that we have had a lot of discussions with the Peel Regional Police that operates within our own. And we in Ontario, we have mandatory charging. So whenever a 911 domestic call comes in, automatically the police lays a charge. It's not the woman actually laying the charge, it's the Crown laying the charge against the person. And many times what I have noticed is that the man is unable to articulate the entire incident that has happened. And I think that we should look at different kind of training to police officers in terms of actually listening to their side of the story as well. So if one person is crying and the other person is not crying, it's an automatically inclination of the one person who is neutral to side with the person who is crying because the person is really crying, is sobbing, is doing all kind of things, and the other person is just saying, "No, I didn't hit her, I didn't do anything. This is just being dramatic." And the more you try to defend it, the more you are being perceived as an insensitive and incaring person. So that's one issue. The second issue is, to what extent are we funding men's programs where men can come and have some discussion with them? We don't have that many. We barely funded women's programs to the capacity that women can be served. If you look at, all shelters are always full, and shelters take between 7 to a month to get a bed for abused women with children. So, we are understaffed at sexual assault, rape crisis centers. Women's services are not fully looked after. Never mind the men's program. So initially, many years ago in Ontario, we had 16-week program for men who had assaulted their partners. Now it has cut down to 12 weeks. So the services are being cut. There aren't enough services for men out there. So of course the immigrant men are feeling the burden of this whole thing. And I think that there has to be many level of activities. There has to be organizations advocating for more funding for men's programs, and that there has to be some other issues within the community that should be taken up, where men can go and kind of have their side of the story. At least somebody should be able to hear. So that's kind of in a very quick nutshell what I had to say.
Thanks, Beldev. And just because you're also here right now, Napoleon had another question where he asked that you said men should talk to their wives instead of talking to other men to resolve their issues and to communicate their issues. But 30% of the fathers in his group confirm that their wives don't listen to them when they try to communicate, and that's why they turn to alcohol to find refuge. So I guess the question would be, like, how would they be able to communicate to their wives their needs and concerns and have them listen to them?
Yeah, a very fair question. Absolutely a fair question. The question for me is that there has been obviously disagreements going on for a long time, where one partner has completely started to shut down, doesn't want to even listen to the other partner's point of view at all. That is a um, uh, um, prime example of what can go wrong during disagreements, where one partner is not willing to listen at all, and the man is saying, please listen, I have an important point to tell you, and the person says, no, enough of it. Last time you yelled and screamed, you demeaned me, I don't want to listen to you. And now the disconnect between the two sides is so great that chances of intimate partner violence increases. So the question for us is, if we talk to men and men are unable to calm this person down, this person is going to be in trouble. If the person wants to talk to the wife, but the wife doesn't want to listen, this person is in trouble. So either way, this person is in trouble. So the question for us is there enough information in the community where men can sit down and find the help that they need? This requires a professional intervention now, either marriage counseling, if there is no violence, but if there is violence, that's going to be even more challenge, because how do you counsel someone when there is intimate partner violence in a couple? It's just not possible, right? Because no counselor is going to entertain it while this is taking place. So it becomes very problematic with this kind of an information. I think that we are in Canada struggling that we do not have programs where we can screen couples to what extent violence has taken place. Uh, how are the two people wanting to resolve this issue? Is there any alternative other than 911 call? Because the moment 911 call happens, a different set of scenario takes place. And then immigrant communities go through different kind of frustrations and stress. Both the wife goes through different stresses, and the husband goes through different stresses. So I think that it requires a lot more discussion, and I hope that I have been able to answer to some extent, but I know that much more things need to be addressed other than what I have just been able to answer. But the questions were very valid. We see it all the time in our programs.
Thank you so much, Baldev. So definitely seeking out professional help. And as he mentioned, like if it is intimate partner violence, that is super challenging to navigate. So I would like to also just ask Brianna, like, did you want to respond to the first question about how do we help men from immigrant backgrounds experiencing domestic violence to speak out?
I think the same is creating more awareness about what is abuse and when we're talking about abuse or unhealthy relationships to make sure we're not gendering the language. So yes, we can talk about the differences around how certain populations are more affected, like women and girls and LGBTQ, but that men are also. And so to try to give examples in your scenarios or to normalize and to create awareness, because oftentimes the image of domestic violence, people often because of the statistics of it often being a higher population of men to women, often the examples people can't see it and often men can't identify it, so therefore they don't think that they're entitled to supports or services. So to make it very aware that there are men's services, to bring in guest speakers from those groups to help normalize it, to help connect and to let them know that they're not alone, there's no stigma and shame. So try to bring in guest speakers to programs so it's less scary that there is a person and they're here, and if you want to connect, great. And yeah, just more awareness around those topics and normalizing. But I'll leave it there just because of time.
Thanks, Brianna. Did anyone have any more questions for the speakers? If anyone has any questions that they want to ask, that they suddenly think of like in the afternoon or tomorrow, feel free to email me and I can ask the speaker directly and I can relay an answer. So I just typed in my email address in the Zoom chat. Feel free to reach out to me. And this will conclude today's webinar. Thank you so much, Brianna and Beldev and Taylor for joining me today for this webinar that explores how to break the stigma for immigrant men to reach out for mental health supports. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences working and engaging with men in the GBV prevention sphere, and also just engaging them to become healthier versions of themselves on their journey to healing. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a lovely day. And Brianna and Beldev, also feel free to share your email addresses if you want to connect with anyone or if you want people to know how to contact you. Thank you.